Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Appreciate you tuning in for this IPA talk. Tuning in, I don't know if people actually tune in anymore. You just start the video on YouTube and then you're off and running. But I am grateful to have with me Dr. Michael Allen, who Michael, you have a couple of different titles, I would suppose, at this point in time. Currently principal at Oakton Elementary School in the Evanston School District. You are now a speaker, trainer. I know you do some administrator academies for IPA, so sure grateful for that. Also here, as of about a year or so ago, an author of the book Brotherly Love that you co-authored with your brother Gilbert, and definitely wanted to get into that a little bit. But first, just want to say thanks for spending time driving down from the Evanston area last night and spending the night here in Springfield and then joining me today. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jason. It's been a tremendous honor and privilege. It's great to share the space with you. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the information that I've been able to establish over the course of my life.
Awesome. Well, I'd be remiss with, if I didn't take an opportunity to have, and I have an outstanding school leader like yourself, because, and you've got the credibility to back it up. You were the North Cook Region's Elementary Principal of the Year, I think, in 2020. So it's obviously recognized. But we are still in a word that I hate using. I think we're going to ban it from the dictionary at some point. Unprecedented, right? So we're still working through this extraordinary time. And getting school started, still in the pandemic. And so just kind of curious, Michael, what's happening in your school right now? And to give people context, it's August 17th, the day that we're making this recording, so it is right at the precipice of the start of school. What's happening in your school and community right now as you're working to get kids back into the swing of things?
Yeah, so we are we're in full gear now. So I would say that we're taking a holistic approach. If I had to describe D65, but also Oakton itself, we're really looking at how to prioritize the humanity of all of our students in every decision we make. So we're looking at everything from moving back 6-foot restrictions that we had in the classroom setting to 3 feet, and a host of other things that are all according to CDC guidelines. Simple things like designating multiple spaces for lunch. So in our school, we're not just using the standard cafeteria to have lunch for kids. We're moving to our auditorium to expand space. We're also changing our structure of how we look at lunch, recess, block, all of that. Classrooms in general have expanded with some of the basic regulations, which is the case all across the board from CDC guidelines. But the biggest thing I would say, whether it's professional development, whether it's thinking about teaching and learning itself in the classroom setting, we're trying to make sure that our teachers understand how to prioritize their own wellness. So thinking about the things that they need each day from a wellness perspective, everything from mindfulness to being conscious of their diet to how we schedule classes, and then also the idea of what trauma that we all have endured over the last 17 months. Prioritizing supports and instruction under that guise so that can inform how we look at accelerating learning in the fall. So it's a holistic approach. It's everything from the technical pieces of the CDC guidelines, but also making sure we're clear around matching of student needs. So it's been interesting talking to parents about the types of things that kids have endured and then how we can kind of match them with teachers and strategies in the school and approaches that ultimately will enhance the holistic approach, for lack of better words, to support learning. So that would probably be, it's not individualized to Oakton. I do think that is Dr. Horton's vision for District 65. He is a grassroots radical leader with respect to accelerating learning, but he's not void of the humanity of all people. And I think that's been great and refreshing to be a part of that process.
So I've heard a podcast or two that you've done, a couple of things over the last several months, and I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind. You talk in what I've listened to, and you even referenced it here about recognizing kids as humanity, which I find fascinating.
Yes.
Would you mind expanding on that just a little bit?
Yes. So by humanity, I just mean looking at the complexities of individuals. So this idea, so at Oakton, we often say to our students and staff members alike that they don't have to hide any part of their identity. So we're okay with accepting their language, their culture, their sexual orientation, their gender, even if it's different than the one that they were assigned at birth. It's our responsibility to accept the full aspect of who they are as a human being and sort of captivate that as a part of and a recipe for learning. I've just found that one of the things that is unique about where I am in my journey in life, but in my career, is finding peace to be all that I am. The duality in that. So there's something that's uniquely aligned to accelerating one's growth and development in life, especially in education, when you can just be yourself. And so that's how we sort of center learning in professional development in Oakton and at District 65.
Well, it's a heck of a way to be setting the culture of your school, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we mess up enough, right?
Well, that's where grace comes into play,
Exactly.
which I need plenty. You can just ask my wife and kids,
Same
and
here.
they'll tell you that for sure. Well, let me ask you, just kind of spinning back to the pandemic a bit. How's that impacted your view of leadership and just how you're approaching leadership right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say the biggest thing that I've learned from the pandemic that was I was flirting with, for lack of better words, before the pandemic, is this idea of what does it look like to ensure that each person's available for learning, whether we make it about the staff members who have the tremendous responsibility of planning high quality and robust instruction for kids day to day, despite juggling all the demands of society, but also our technical world in education, or the students who were now 17 months removed from this catastrophic pandemic and virus that's impacted all of our lives. What does it look like to have each person available to learn? So to me, as a building leader, what I've learned is that that's the most crucial element to prioritize, because if we can stabilize the conditions that make one available for learning, be it the staff members or the students, or both, I would say in our case, then we have the ability to radically accelerate kids' ability to grow academically, but more importantly as human beings, which again is the center of how we look at learning. So I think the single most important variable to really impacting where education is going to go in the next 2 to 3 years is going to be based on how schools respond to the conditions for staff members and students to be available for learning.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, and this is a question that's being asked so much that it's almost a cliche to ask it. But when you think about this period of time that we've been in now, and you think about your own school or what you're observing in schools across the board, like what are we hanging on to moving forward? Maybe what are we letting go from moving forward? What are your thoughts with that?
Great question. I like the idea of being able to have access in various spaces. So this idea that, for example, I could lead a workshop here and still pop into professional development for a group of teachers that may need me, or a group of principals for that matter, if I'm coaching them, for example. We can be in multiple spaces. We don't have to physically be present as much as we were before. It's a double-edged sword for sure. But I do see the idea that kids whose families may have catastrophic incidents or events could still stay plugged in if that's what makes the most sense for them. If they're moving across the country for a couple of weeks at a time, we can be more creative with how we look at professional learning. There are implications when you think about a flipped classroom. It was crazy 10 years ago to think about how radical that was.
Yeah, right.
As an instructional strategy, it has basically overnight become the foundation of education. So those are the pieces I think for sure. Technology, being the center of learning, has sort of shifted to giving us much more access to information at a different scale. And I do think we have a unique opportunity to start to prioritize what independence looks like for learners.
Right.
I love the idea of being in workshops with kids or even with teachers and being able to ask for their thoughts in the chat and get every single person that's there in real time, as opposed to like having to skip around the room to do that. But I think there are some great ways that education as a whole has sort of enhanced the way we approach instruction and from a robust standpoint over the course of the pandemic. And I think we'll probably need to hold on to those. I do think this idea of like multitasking could be a bit toxic if we're not careful around how to be fully present and wherever we are at that point in time.
You bet. Well, as I hear you talk about flipped classrooms or personalization of learning, not to go too far down a rabbit trail here, but it makes me think of like competency-based education.
Yes.
And really letting kids, drive their learning and showing where they're competent and then being able to move on. And I think maybe we're going to have more permission and allow ourselves to have more permission to to do those things and provide those kinds of opportunities for kids. So really excited about that.
I hope so. That should be the way to capitalize, wouldn't you think? Right.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk a little bit about your story, Michael. And you and your brother Gilbert have quite a story, and that has now been captured in a book that you co-authored, came out back in September of 2020. And just really excited about this and your approach to the writing and you being very intentional about it, at least from the reading I've done, and just curious about some of your thoughts with it. But before getting into the book itself, would you mind sharing as much as you're comfortable with, just your story with your brother and what led to Brotherly Love and the book that you co-wrote together?
Yes. So it's an interesting story. I feel like I can never tell it the same way each time I tell it.
I'm sure that's right. Absolutely.
But Gilbert and I would probably say a similar version of the same thing. We had this experience where we were both away. I was away at college in Valparaiso, Indiana, at Valparaiso University. And he was
doing quite a bit, right? You talking a little bit before we started recording. I mean, you had a lot going on there while you were at school, right?
Yes, I was in the middle of what I would call the flow. So I remind him of this. I gave up 2.5 of my great years in college to be a parent to my little brother. But so I was in the middle of being captain of the football team, student senator on the dean's list, had just joined a fraternity, and my football team was, a week away from championship game.
Wow.
When I found out that he was going through a catastrophic situation back home and was on the verge of considering dropping out of high school and sort of going down a different path. So what I did is I went back home and was able to convince my mother to sign over guardianship of him and essentially adopted him and brought him back with me to college and enrolled him at the local high school. So he was a sophomore in high school when I was a sophomore in college. He was reading at a 3rd or 4th grade level. And his math skills were about the same at that point in time, was receiving pretty intensive special education services. So it wasn't just little brother coming, it was little brother who had a lot of intense needs. He's a great kid in that he's hardworking and has great character, so it was an easy decision in a sense. But in the book, we detail just the journey from where he was as a 15-year-old, sort of on the verge of going in the wrong direction in life, and me being able to intervene, and then what we endured on that journey in Valparaiso, everything from the effects of systemic racism to the lessons we learned to show up for each other, the love that came with that, mentorship, mindfulness, the importance of mental health and therapy, and all those different things are different parts of what we detail in the book about our journey through finding our purpose. So we try to, the book in essence is this love letter to us, to our younger selves. So we're trying to provide this information that we've been able to accumulate over life that we wish we had earlier. But we recognize the value of young people needing it as well. And me spending most of my time as a principal in middle school, I really was keen about the ability to recognize how fragile middle schoolers are, particularly 4th all the way up until 8th grade. And we spent a lot of time focusing on primary and teaching kids to read, and then we started to get a bit more concerned with where kids are or young adults are when they're entering high school. And so we don't spend a lot of time in thinking about the intricacies of the humanity that has to be prioritized in middle schoolers because of how fragile they are. Literally, these young people are walking in at 4 foot something and they leave at 6 foot something.
Right. Lots of hormones going on, all of that stuff.
Hair in places that they didn't know they could have.
That's right.
And so it's important to make sure that that's centered as a foundation to influencing where the world is going. And I think we just wanted to do our part in giving back. So much of the story was for me as an educator, but me also as a brother and me as a humanitarian, and Gilbert the same way as a clinician, as a brother, but also having his hand in grassroots work in different communities that are vulnerable and marginalized. We sort of wanted to tell our own story in our own voice, and sort of give information that we thought was valuable to young folks.
So I was reading a little bit, Michael, about both your story and then also just, part of the rationale for why you wrote the book the way that you did, because it is let me back up. Middle school students are the audience, basically. That age group, the way that you wrote it, a lot of illustrations and things are there. Another thing that I read that you had talked about is some personal research that you had done as you were looking at literature curriculum in New York, right? And
Yes.
and how Black authors and Latinx authors, others marginalized groups were not being represented in the curriculum. When what was the stat I saw? Like 85%.
Over 85% of the background of the kids in New York public schools are of color. But the exact opposite was the case of what they were exposed to in terms of literature.
I think what I saw that you said something about that animals had more representation there, right?
So kids of color saw more images in textbooks and stories of animals than they did of their own culture. So.
Which is extremely problematic for a variety of reasons. But that spurred, I would guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but really influenced your decision, obviously, to write the book, tell your story, but then also to work to focus on middle school kids. And I'll make this the last thing that I reference, at least within this line of questioning that I saw you talked about. For you personally, I almost could pick up on, not only because of the work that you do now, but also that you have a real heart for these kids, because that time frame for you was really important. Like that you were making personal decisions for yourself, that I'm going to do big things, and you were saying that to your middle school self, basically, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I remember this, really one of my first trips downtown. I don't remember what the trip was about, like what we were going for, but one of my favorite teachers of all time, her name is Dr. Linda Mechek. She took us downtown during Marshall Fields, essentially, right before like the Christmas holiday. And I was in sixth grade, really hadn't left the community of Waukegan to come to Chicago, especially downtown. But for the first time, I remember this this idea of at lunch break, all of these people from various races and cultures leaving, but the men of color in particular, in their briefcases and fancy suits, made quite the impression on me as a young person, sort of immersed in poverty at that point in time. And I remember deciding, like, okay, I can do something different than what I saw every day. Suddenly, like, these ideas that I think were hope-filled became practical to me that day. And I think that experience, but also the conversations and some of the different unique tools that I was able to acquire over the course of my middle school journey, I think somehow I was able to get back to my brother. And through advocating for him, what I recognized is so many kids didn't have Michaels as their big brothers and didn't have parents who knew some of the things that I knew about the system and could advocate relentlessly to get them what they deserve. So great to be able to have that influence, number one, and give this resource in the form of the book, but also the practical nature of how to approach life for the young people who are on the other side of reading each page.
So, Michael, through your examples, you were talking a little bit about what young people and others are gleaning from the book, or what you're hopeful for them to be gleaning from the book. But specifically, I know you and your brother Gilbert have done a few book tours. You've been out, signing copies and things. You're talking with people. Maybe some of your own students have had the opportunity to read it. What's their reaction? What are they telling you about the impact that it's having, particularly? I'm sure with your own student population and from these individuals that you're talking to, that they're seeing someone that looks like them and are telling this story and what that means to them.
It's been refreshing to see, but I've heard a lot of different things. So here's what I'll talk about the obvious stuff that I think you might want to hear from kids. Most students are saying it's great they can show up and either identify immediately with myself or Gilbert. Yeah. So they're either the younger sibling or the older sibling or somewhere in the middle, but they can relate to the sibling dynamic of the book itself. And sort of the leadership skills that each one develops, and the idea of being able to support each other and recognizing that siblings have to rely on each other to grow. Yeah. But then also the idea of being able to name and talk through systemic racism and what that looks like in a practical, literal form. That's been something that's been refreshing to hear from young folks.
And their own personal experiences, correct?
And how they can relate to it. Yeah. So whether it be kids of color who've been on the one end of racism itself, or kids who are white who've seen things happen and haven't quite had the language to know how to advocate or even what equity looks like for them as middle schoolers and how to show up and be humane in their responses to things has been powerful. I would also say the holistic or wellness approach to it has been powerful to hear kids say, I'm an athlete. I've been playing basketball for the last 5 years, and I never realized that LeBron James practices mindfulness and mental fitness. And I've been trying it since I read your book. And here's what I've learned. Like, I can get more focused at the free throw line. Here are parts of my game that have been improved. And then I would probably say the most inconvenient information that we didn't really plan for is just the idea that all people have a kid in them or a child in them or a middle schooler in them that hadn't necessarily been resolved. And so these are some different pieces that people can go back and say, oh, wow, this is something that I think I can connect with as an adult, not just my child, but I can connect with this as an adult and see how some of the things that maybe I wanted to happen when I was in middle school didn't, and here are some holistic ways that I can respond to it, not just as a strategy, but as a lifestyle approach. So those are the greatest things we've been able to hear. There's a couple of companies that specialize in everything from bullying to, or anti-bullying, I should say, that have been able to center aspects of the book and help educate teachers and other educators around how to support wellness approaches to the humanity of kids, everything from the kid who's being bullied to the kid who's taking part in the bullying behavior, the upstanders, and everything in between has been some of the refreshing pieces of feedback we've received. We didn't necessarily write with all of that intentionality. We just knew the age group we were targeting, but it's been deeply gratifying for me as an educator who sees myself as being able to support the humanity of all people, to see that it's not just a text that's only designed for Black and brown students. It also has equal implications on how to develop the humanity and the practical equity investment of even some of my white students, or all of them, I should say.
Yeah. Well, and I find it particularly fascinating. You talk about adults reflecting back on their experiences, because, you know, do any of us get through middle school unbruised? I mean, really, and either by your own self-infliction or those that have inflicted pain on you. I think we all both are dealing with it, because that time frame is so unique with all the things we talked about before. But I find that particularly interesting that you're even receiving some of that, which is probably not something you guys were thinking you were going to get hit with when you were writing the book initially.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, let me ask something that maybe you've been asked this before, you and your brother, but something I'm definitely interested in as a parent of 4 boys. My daughter Emma's our only girl; she's our oldest. But so, what was it like writing a book with your brother, Gilbert? That process. Obviously, you two have a very unique relationship because of the history that you share together. But you're still brothers, right? And I'm sure do things that brothers do. So what was that process like for both of you? Because it can't always be easy, right? Man, I mean, there's no way.
This is the part I'm sure Gilbert would say something different. We're both right, but the reality is it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah.
It was.
I mean, writing a book by itself's hard, right?
Exactly. So it was tough and gratifying at the same time. So the pieces that were tough is, I found myself at the beginning of the process, our commitment was to have equal voice.
Yeah.
But I found myself taking over, whether it be
well,
because
you're the older brother, right? And that's kind of the role that you've been playing through your life, correct?
Exactly. So it was the older brother tendency, was also the principal tendency.
Did he remind you of that occasionally?
He did. He did conveniently remind me of that. So we hit one of the pieces that we both like talking about is there was this piece. Most people don't know when you read the book. It's sort of a chapter book, right? It's a short read on purpose, and it's 10 chapters. But every chapter starts off with an image, and then there's a quote that rhymes. The last word of each line rhymes, and then there's the words of the chapter. So what happened is the first version of the book was written as a completely rhyming text. So every last word of each line rhymed, and we had it given to our illustrator and our team to kind of morph into pictures that fit that. Yeah. And what they originally told us, based on our target audience, that it needed to be a chapter book. So I was pretty offended by that and surprised as an educator, because I felt like I knew what we were trying to do. And Gilbert stepped in and was like, "Wait, Mike, I think they're on to something. Let's step back. If you're just going to plow ahead, then you're not listening and including my voice." And so we were able to step back, and ultimately what the book is, it's 2 books in one.
Interesting.
So the lines that rhyme on each each picture is the original version of the book we were able to pull out. And then the actual chapter words and are actually Gilbert. So the rhyming piece is more heavily Michael focused, and the actual chapter itself is more Gilbert focused. So it was a true like transformation of collaboration and true progressive connection and equal voice in the book. But it was tough. So I appreciated the time that we got to spend together and bond and, eat pizza and wings all times of night. But at the same time, it was tough. The reflective conversations I had to have with him and then even with myself after were interesting for sure.
Yeah. Well, I love how you talk about how you can see both of you in the book and the writing and all of that. And I do know, Michael, and obviously I want to be very sensitive with this, but both of your folks have passed. You shared that with me. But you did get the opportunity to share the book with your mom.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a heavy experience. I think so. We knew that our mom was transitioning into hospice during the earlier parts of the fall. So just weeks before the book was published, but Gilbert and I are just deeply gratified for being able to give the first signed copy to our mother, who was proud. She was beaming from ear to ear and almost in tears with how grateful she was and proud she was of us for being able to accomplish this milestone that we all see as a part of our family's legacy. So it was just interesting to be able to see the sacrifices and so much support that she poured into us over the years sort of come full circle. And to be able to be a part of that made my brother and I deeply gratified, for sure.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, and she'd probably be glad to know that you're on to book number 2 here, is what you shared with me, right? So do you have enough formulated, at least in mind, that you can give us an idea of what it is that you're thinking about?
Yes. So one of the critiques, which we knew about on the front end, about book 1 was that it wasn't long enough to fit adults, in particular high school students, as well as young adults going off to college. So it's essentially a YA version of the same book. So we go into the weeds as to what Gilbert was dealing with, not just literally implying that he was thinking about selling drugs, but the conversations he was having, where his thoughts were, the intricacies of those conversations with teachers who didn't believe in his dreams, some of the interests that people care about knowing in college life. We go a bit more into the weeds to talk about those situations that connect to high school students and young adults in life. So it's just a longer version of the same book, going into the intricate details of what is valuable to grow and learn from.
Yeah, that's great. Well, looking forward to seeing that. Any time frame that you're thinking about?
Definitely 2022.
Okay.
So probably realistically mid 2022. I'm thinking.
Awesome. That's great. Well, you are a sitting school leader, but I know that you have various passions. You talk about equity and the work that you're doing there. So, besides your work as a school leader, what other, in training for the IPA, which we're grateful for, but what are you really involved with? What kinds of things are you doing?
Yes, so just like I described in college,
yeah, right.
I haven't quite figured out how to take all the stuff off my plate. So in addition to being a school leader, I really have found a deep passion in grassroots equity work. So I see myself also from a part-time perspective being involved in executive leadership coaching. It's everything from author visits for young people to support and teacher development to being a thought partner with leaders like us on how to operationalize or make equity work practical, not just in teaching and learning, but the conditions of school environments and other organizations of that nature. So those are a lot of the different things that I picked up over time. My brother and I kind of have this equal passion for what we call youth wellness workshops.
Yeah. And so, he's a social worker, by the way.
He's
correct?
A clinician by trade, working on his doctorate in community care and counseling. Yeah, I don't envy him these days.
Not at this point, not on the other side of it, for sure.
But the point is, what we've been able to do is sort of prioritize all the skills and gifts that we've been able to acquire over the course of our life and give them back to vulnerable and marginalized people of all kinds. So much of my passion and Gilbert's as well is figuring out how to infuse ourselves into things like policy. So not just talking about what equity looks like, but why is our history curriculum a bit outdated with even the humanity of people? So how can we influence that? How do we get into organizations that prioritize substance abuse and drug addiction and mental illness and dealing with that and making it a mainstay in our society? It's a lot of the work that I try to throw myself in the little free time that I have. So That's what my priorities are.
That's free
outside of
time as a school leader, right?
it. Doesn't exist.
Especially right now, for sure. Well, if people are looking to find you, Michael, and your brother Gilbert, where can they do that?
So I think the easiest places to find us now would be brotherlylovebook.com. That's the actual website for the book itself. Brotherlylovebook.com.
Great.
And then our actual email address is brotherlylovebook@gmail.com.
Great, and we'll be sure to put that in the
Yes.
message notes too for people too. Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Good to meet you here today, and thanks for all the good work you're doing for kids, as well as for this outstanding book, and you guys being willing to tell your story. I mean, that in itself was a pretty courageous decision. So sure grateful for that as well.
No, thank you, Jason. I think you all are doing some really progressive work with the Illinois Principals Association. I'm just honored and privileged to be able to have partnered with you over the course of my career so far, and I'm looking forward to continue to support the efforts that you all have.
Absolutely. Well, without good people like you, we don't make it happen, that's for sure. So again, my name's Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association, joined by Dr. Michael Allen, school leader at Oakton Elementary up in the Evanston School District, as well as co-author with his brother Gilbert to the book Brotherly Love. Be sure to go check that out, and again, we'll make sure the link to their site is available in the message notes. If there's anything that IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call at any time, or you can check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.